First of all, thanks for everyone for coming. This should be a good topic to talk about. Great perspective here. We have someone representing the advertising world, the agency world, two people obviously from well-known measurement firms, and then two people from newer companies who are doing some innovative stuff in the space. So to kick us off, I'm going to ask everyone to give a couple sentences about themselves, about their company if it's not known. And one other answer to one other question. Who here is familiar with Michael Lewis, author of Moneyball, Liar's Poker, et cetera? Well, rumor has it he's writing a book about the online advertising industry, the exciting and sexy industry that it is today. And assuming that each of the panelists here are going to be covered in the book, which I'm assuming would happen if that were the case, when the movie comes out, what actor or actress would you have play yourself, please? Jasmine, you're first.
I pass.
Well, tell us about yourself, at least.
So my name is Jasmine Bantons. I've spent the last 13 years in the digital space, 5 of which have been with Digitas. I lead strategy analytics there for our company, for financial and a CPG advertiser. Prior to that, I spent several years in the media buying and planning world for both digital and offline. So it's a good spot to be in to understand the interrelation between strategy and media.
I'm going to say Angelina Jolie. I think every woman wants to have her play your part at some point.
Hi, my name is Josh Chasen. I'm Chief Research Officer at ComScore, and obviously George Clooney.
Well done.
I'm Scott McKinley. I run product leadership at Nielsen for advertising effectiveness products. I don't know who would play me.
I think Brad Pitt was probably the standard answer.
Jonathan Mendez, founder and CEO of YieldBot. YieldBot is a publisher-side technology that captures, organizes, and makes actionable visit intent in real time, and allows advertisers to buy that intent in real time as well. Actor, I don't know, Al Pacino.
Perfect.
Hi, I'm Diaz Nessamani. I'm the founder and CEO of Jivox. We're a technology platform that is used to create interactive video ads, which can be delivered across multiple screens, smartphones, tablets, and the web. And the ads have various interactive features like social media, find a store, download a coupon, et cetera, directly from the ad. And so as you can imagine, there's a lot of analytics in that. My two prior companies were also in the data and analytics space.
No one to play you?
Sorry?
I said no one to play you in the movie?
I don't know. Did somebody say Brad Pitt already?
Perfect. His twin brother. Really good. So there's no question, as we look at this topic and as we look at advertising in general, that the web has done a great job of being a direct response medium. We've seen all kinds of growth in that area and all kinds of money shifting over from direct mail, from classifieds, from other offline direct mail or direct response type vehicles. The real question is, when does online become mainstream for brand advertisers? We also know that we've been talking about this for a long time. We know that every day that goes by, there's more people using the web to do research, to figure out whether they like a brand or not, forming opinions, and sharing those opinions. Having said that, we also know how complicated it is. It's crazy right now how it's become even more complicated over the last several years in terms of the number of choices, the number of devices, the amount of data that we can collect to try to analyze whether something is successful or not. It's intimidating if you're in the industry as someone who's an insider. I can't imagine coming from the outside and trying to create a strategy from scratch as someone who hasn't done a lot online before. So my first question is to everyone here is, let's just say I'm a CMO of a huge brand. I don't sell anything online. I'm trying to create a brand, and I know I have to reach my audience who's increasingly more online. How do I do it? What are some basic things I need to do before I even get started?
So some of the things that we've done is looking at single source sales research studies to connect the dots between online exposure and offline sales. And we've used companies such as ComScore, dunnhumby, Nielsen, Catalina, and HomeScan to really kind of understand how digital is impacting our consumers. It's not about the click. We've seen that 99% of the people aren't clicking, but we're still seeing a very good return on investment for our brands. I would also say that looking at other kinds of metrics that can really correlate to sales if you are not able to do the single source, using things as proxies to understand if an engagement is leading to actual sales is something else that we've been doing.
And so instead of a conversion, you're using a purchase offline as kind of an indication of whether something's successful or not?
Correct.
And how scalable is that? How can you?
It's very scalable with tools such as Catalina. It depends on the number of impressions that you're buying, as well as how large your brands are in terms of penetration in the household. But that you have been able to tease out that data. Other things that you can do is also looking at improving your marketing mix modeling so that you're not just looking at is it +4, but there are things that you can do to look at a DMA level, which then can tease out greater responses specifically for digital. So that's something that we've also been looking and exploring.
Can I just pick up on that last point?
Please.
Because I think that's an excellent point. I was actually going to mention something about that. Because my question back to the CMO would be, well, what justifies the wheelbarrows of cash that you put into TV? And it's probably going to come back to the market mix models, which I think it's probably fair to say have the deck somewhat stacked in favor of TV, certainly in terms of the input data. So I think that one of the things that we need to do with digital is get better at making sure that digital is represented in these market mix models, because that's the short answer to the question. How are you going to decide where to put those wheelbarrows full of cash?
Anyone else Scott, you want to jump on that?
Well, I think the first thing the CMO is going to do is say, what was I thinking to take this job? Because the average tenure of a CMO now is, depending on whatever the latest report is, somewhere between 17 and 22 months. Actually, less time. The CMO's in his job less time than it takes the CMO to become effective in their job, and that's because it's a weird purgatory of a job where you've got incredible pressure from your board and your CFO for accountability, and yet you have no metrics to measure your activities. It's just it's a thankless, in my opinion, brutal position to take. But once you're there, you have to make good with what you have, and I think you've got to do two things. You've got to push hard into the new opportunities that exist in the internet and digital media. You've got to carve out almost experimentation dollars, and this has been done, but it's got to have real accountability behind it. Instead of just throwing dollars at the shiny new toy, I think you have to put the dollars at the shiny new toy, and then you got to demand from your teams and your agencies the accountability that's going to be there to justify the continued investment in those vehicles. And that's something that we as an industry don't do really well. We're great at saying, hey, look at this shiny new toy. It's social media. It's interactive gaming. It's whatever. But we don't provide the metrics that allow that CMO to continue making investments in that medium. And the second thing that CMO's got to do is it's got to recognize that there is a way that things have been done for decades, and you can't just walk away from those things. It's GRPs, it's mixed modeling, it's all of these things. And so you've got to sort of be zen about it. You've got to simultaneously push hard into new innovations and recognizing that the digital is a better way to find your audiences, but those audiences are narrow. At the same time, you have to acknowledge that there's a way that things are done, and you've got to slowly bring those old systems and processes up to speed to make the new medium make sense in the whole mix.
I think just one thing I wanted to add is that we always say, oh gosh, you've got to set goals, which is kind of pretty obvious for any campaign. But I think with digital media, first off, it's a mix, right? You're continuing to do traditional media, TV, print, and other stuff. So, but it's just that the goals in digital media have to be tied to the opportunities digital media offers, which is, as you were talking, going deep. Digital media is an engagement platform by and large, especially if you go into social media, tablets, smartphones, and so on. There's tremendous opportunity to create and therefore to measure engagement. So if the goals are not tied towards those kinds of opportunities, then I think the result is disappointment and confusion about why I took money from here, put it there, and didn't get the results I was expecting. So I think it's very important to tie goals to what these platforms are capable of doing.
Yeah, so I'll just add on to that. It depends on the particular campaign, what the goal is, and it depends on the brand. If they're trying to create demand generation, if they're trying to do demand capture. I mean, think about Target, who does a little of both. I think it's pretty hard to beat $8 to $14 CPMs and first-tier cable television to create awareness and drive it. But a lot of that will get driven to digital.
Did you say you're pushing cable television over online?
Yes. If I was a CMO, that's where I would spend a lot of my demand gen types of budgets. But what we can do is actually see that move into digital. I mean, if you just look at Google, half of the top terms every day are driven from TV. So I think it gets down to what the mix is the way those strategies come together to create generation and awareness, and then to capture it digital, both from an outcome perspective and also from an analytic perspective, to measure and see the behavior and other types of social chatter sharing, those types of things that are resultant from that.
So John, the thing about TV though, and obviously TV's not going out of style anytime soon. We were kidding about that before, but all the research that we've done when we look at TV and digital tends to show that shifting some of your TV money into digital helps the plan, right? It can add reach, it can add frequency against the low frequency audience to the TV plan. As a result, like what we're hearing from advertisers, and I think what the IAB's hearing, or from the 3MS initiative as well, is that advertisers are actually trying to figure out how to put more money into digital. You're right about TV; it's definitely sort of like the 800-pound gorilla. But there, I think all the research shows that shifting TV money to digital is good for your plan.
I think it's, and I'm definitely not going to argue with your research, but I think it's, again, what I'm trying to get at is they have to work in synergy together, and they can work unbelievably well together. I think very few, I think we need real analytics and metrics around that, to bring it back to the topic, to show that and to prove it, and that will drive more spend into.
And then that comes back to making sure that we have investments around research so that you can measure those right metrics. And I think that's some of the challenges that CMOs face, is setting aside research budgets to actually measure what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah. So 10 years ago, or a little more than that even, I remember I was at DoubleClick in the late 90s, and we were told, or helped evangelize the web and talk about how it's going to be this great brand medium. And at the time, we always talked about we're so close to getting brands online, and dollars are sitting on the sidelines about to come online in huge amounts. If you talk to someone today, you'll hear that same story, and that was 12, 13 years ago. How have we done as an industry to get brands comfortable in terms of with the technologies and the metrics and the standardization that we have? If on a scale of 1 to 10, Jasmine, I'll start with you, 10 being the best, what would you rate us as an industry?
I'd say about a 7. I think we started out just really pushing click-through rates, and we shot ourselves in the foot with that metric. We've done a good job of trying to move away from that, because, but I'm still educating clients around what are the most important KPIs that we need to measure. If it is about sales and using reach vehicles to drive sales, then measure it as sales. If it is about engagement, then using the right tactics that can ladder back up to those objectives and measuring it. And so we've done a really good job, I think. There can be improvements if you look at, we've done tons of ad effectiveness studies. We certainly need to improve on those methodologies, but also connecting the dots and saying, if it is about ad recall, or if it is about an intent metric, how does that move sales? And having those proxies if you can actually look at sales. And I think Nielsen IAG has done a really good job of connecting ad recall to sales, specifically for some of our CPG brands. And we can look at that as data points.
How often is click-through used as a proxy for some sort of success at this point?
I think it still is. It's just a matter of education to our clients that it is not important. And I've striven to sort of say that it's not.
I have to chime in. I don't know how you could say the click isn't important.
I said it wasn't.
You said it was not.
Yeah. I said it was not.
I know. I don't know how you could say that. Click is not important. It is the defining characteristic of the medium. People click to express their interest and intent around something in particular. So the whole reason I think these other metrics have rose up in importance is because people aren't clicking display ads for any number of reasons. Most of all because it's non-native type of format to the medium.
Right,
it's a user-controlled medium, and the control is the mouse.
I will clarify. It's not important for brand advertising when you're not looking for somebody to actually take an action. When you've got an ad that's about branding, you don't want somebody to take an action and take them away from your site. If it's a direct response campaign or an acquisition campaign or a sweepstakes, you've got a strong call to action and you're expecting them to take that action.
Isn't there more branded content than ever now on the web?
And there is, yes.
And don't brands want people to go to that content?
I think at the end of the day, we want our brands to actually sell product.
Right, but to create the type of awareness that you're talking about, they have to first get to that branded content.
If you're creating branded content, then your objective is around engagement as well as awareness.
Okay,
but
you
branding,
have to get people there first.
If I could
Not
just jump in here, I think the click has done a lot of disservice to this industry in the sense that when we started out with digital, we sold it as a engagement and measurement platform, right? And the problem started with creative. All we could come up with as an industry was banner ads and said, oh, and as a user, what do you do when you see a banner ad? Well, you either just look at it or you click on it. Those are the only two things you can do. So if you asked the question a year ago, I would have said, I would rate us as a 4, but I think now it's more like a 6 or a 7 because I'm very encouraged by what the IAB is doing with the Rising Stars program, where we now have very interactive canvases for users to engage. We have new ad products in the market that allow users to go beyond just looking at an ad or clicking on it. So I think, and yet measurement is lagging. I mean, when we talk to agencies, planners, buyers, and so on, it all goes back to the click because there isn't enough of an understanding of engagement metrics. And I think that's why these discussions are important because we need to educate and communicate the value of metrics outside, over and above the click.
See, the thing about the click, and I'm going to use that to wedge my way in here and say, in answer to your question, I'm going to say like a 3 or a 4 thus far, moving to an 8 or a 9. So the thing with the click is that...
Do you want to put a time frame on that?
Yeah, at the back end of the 3MS initiative. Yeah, that's the whole point of the 3MS initiative. Yeah, and I'll get to it. So the thing with the clicks, John, is that in the world of ad effectiveness, so 1,000 people see, this is why we, and I say we, I'm going to specifically mean me and Jasmine. This is why we are so down on the click, okay? And back me up on this, okay? Is that what we've learned in the branding space is that if 1,000 people see your ad and one of them clicks on the ad, you haven't only been successful in 1 out of 1,000 people. That all of those other 999 people, or some significant share of them, have had that exposure bring them through the funnel, right? And so the reason people are down on the click is that you can't holistically evaluate the performance of your ad campaign just based on the clicks.
So we should drop a pixel on them and then track them around for 90 days and on an ad that was below the fold that they never saw to begin with, and then attribute the purchase or engagement to them.
No, you should use a product like ComScore's VCE to track whether or not the ad was actually seen. No. But that's neither here nor there.
Yes. Well, we don't know if the ad was seen.
Well, we
know if it was visible.
True, fair enough. But that's the same thing you know in every medium, actually.
Okay.
It's the same thing with every medium. Outdoor TV, all you can get to is eyes up.
I will give you that.
I would argue you don't know if it's visible on traditional media a lot of times. It
depends
might
on
be
the
a page in a
medium.
magazine, but doesn't mean someone's picked it up and looked
Depends
at
on
it.
the medium, absolutely.
Exactly, and we're going to get into that.
I'm going to, getting back to your question of, on a scale of 1 to 10, how have we done for the brand advertising dollar? I'm going to put it at a 2, and I think that's generous. I also think moving to an 8, I'd say moving to, I think it's a good way to frame it because it gives us something to work towards, but I think we're moving to a 6 on a 24-month, 36-month horizon. I think we are moving fast. I think we're at an inflection point here. I think everyone's getting it. It's been 15 years of these kinds of conversations. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous they're having the same conversation that people had in 2001 about, is the click's the wrong metric and what's the right metric? That's just hilarious. Haven't we all heard this 1,000 times? I think it's a 2 because for all the reasons we talked about. We started off on the wrong highway. We just went, 100 miles an hour in that direction of DR. And it's a few people early on said, wait a second, this is maybe the wrong direction when we talk about the brand advertising dollar. And so, we're in the process of sort of backing up and starting to go down the the brand direction. But in its essence, digital does not speak brand. Digital speaks direct response. And there's not much difference in terms of sophistication around knowing how to use digital in the mix between a CMO in 1998 and a CMO in 2012. There just isn't. There's a recognition that the media is important, that that's where consumers are going, but we, as an industry, have generally failed to give the brand advertiser metrics that matter at scale and that are actionable. It hasn't happened, and I think we all generally sort of acknowledge that. So we're digital speaking, whatever, English. Brand advertisers are speaking Greek, and we can argue all day about how Greek's an old language and should die, but that's the language they speak. And so we got to do a better job of bringing these things together. We can't just go in, with this arrogance around how sophisticated our billion-dollar systems are and try to tell a story to somebody who doesn't even speak our language. We've got to get these languages to coalesce and to come together and find that Rosetta Stone. And I think it's happening. The thing about the two also, it's hard, right? We shouldn't fault ourselves necessarily. I think it's a really hard nut to crack. I think that ComScore is doing a great job. Nielsen's trying to do what it can. But I think we've got to work harder and work, I think, more collaboratively to take advantage of this big inflection point where the pressure is on, the data is there, the sophistication is there. Everyone's generally aligned in the same direction. We just need to, I think, move more quickly and collaboratively.
So I want to talk about the three in a little bit, but first I want to ask a question based on that to Scott as well as probably Josh, maybe Jasmine. What's your thought on GRPs? So here's something that is arguably one of the roughest calculations in all media, yet a standard and used basically all advertising except for online. A lot of push to potentially create some sort of online GRP, or it's already in some cases out there. Is that the right common language? Is that what we should be using to bridge the gap?
So we've created GRPs, and we've been talking about this for several years now for CPG, for our CPG client with Digitas, and it's important to understand and have a common currency, and we can beat ourselves over the bush and say we are much more accountable than offline, but there are things that, from an offline standpoint, that they're able to measure that we're not. They have an understanding of who they're reaching. They have an understanding of planning and delivering against a particular audience. And it's been somewhat of a black box for us as we think about delivering audiences. And a people 2+, an impression, doesn't equate to an actual person who's in your target audience. So understanding that is incredibly important. I would say that it's not just the GRPs, it's also the reach and frequency. It's understanding how many people are you impacting from that reach perspective, from a cost perspective, from an engagement perspective, and calculating all of those metrics together to understand and weight against that, against your television buy or your print buy.
It is essential. Jasmine and I were talking about this earlier today, and it is essential to disentangle reach from frequency when you think about gross rating points. But let me talk about why GRPs are important, because I think I can finally figure out a metaphor that will help here. Let's suppose, because we're so sophisticated and such media connoisseurs in digital that we think that the gross rating point is a gross and vulgar metric from the olden days and can't possibly apply to our elegant medium. Let's suppose we're talking about coffee, and suppose you really love coffee and you go to the imported coffee store in your neighborhood where you sample all the beans and you think, you use terms like aroma and bouquet, finish, it's a little bit of a nutty flavor. This is a dark, robust bean. Okay, that's great. How much do you want? You know what? You got to scoop it out. No matter what terms you want to use to describe that coffee, you still got to get the scoop and scoop it out, okay? How much do you want? GRPs are the scoop of media. They're the universal scoop of media. And I hope to see that out there, by the way. GRPs are the universal scoop of media.
Wow, I'm speechless. Yeah, fair enough. I would say it's like putting a hand in coming out and coffee grounds are sifting through your hands, and it's better than like an actual measurable scoop, but it's something that you can kind of approximate with.
Well, it's like there are other. It doesn't tell you enough about. It doesn't differentiate one barrel of beans from the other, right? Yeah. It's certainly not the be-all and end-all in evaluating the beans and evaluating the advertising. But when it's time to count it, Really, when it's time to count it, when it's time for Jasmine and her clients to figure out how much TV versus digital they need to buy, you got to get the scoop out.
Quick question on that. Arguably, both Comscore and Nielsen have a much bigger panel online than they do offline, yet it hasn't become a standard. How come? If it's you know, a better panel, arguably more accurate, how come it hasn't taken off like it has offline?
Because TV doesn't have ad servers.
Yeah.
So they don't have the technology.
Yeah, well, I mean,
they don't have statistics that are differing.
This is sort of a bone of contention for me, because there was a part of the 3MS initiative at one point was like, oh, you know, we got to get digital measurement to where TV is. Well, that's easy to do. All we have to do is take 98% of what we have in digital and throw it away. And we will be left with a TV system. We will have a panel. We won't have any site-centric data. We won't have any tagged data from ad campaigns. You know, we won't have any attribution modeling. If you want to get rid of all that stuff, we can have one currency just like TV. The thing about, you know, what everyone says about digital...
And that's just assuming that people are just buying GRPs. And I want to clarify that when you're buying television, it's not just about that. There are other things to look at. There are tools that you can look at from an engagement perspective. You can look at Trendar and Bluefin to measure what people are saying from a social aspect. And then what buyers are doing is equating that and saying if somebody's much more engaged in a program, engaged in the content of the show or the actors, then they're more likely to be multitasking and certainly looking at the commercials. We're doing the same thing from a digital perspective. We're trying to look at people who are engaged. So I want to clarify that it's not just about GRPs. You're looking at things a little bit more holistically. And there are, you know, and we've seen in decades that a GRP is equal to how you're moving your brand in terms of products. But if you don't know how many GRPs you're buying from or what you're delivering against a target audience, it's impossible to understand, well, then how much dollars should I shift to online? And that's really key. It's not the end-all, be-all. I think it's a very good first step. Great.
I don't disagree. Let's move on to engagement in the 3MS. As I think most people here in the audience probably know about. If not, Josh, maybe you can give us a quick description of your belief in the 3MS.
If someone else wants to, that's fine. I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking.
You want engagement in the context of 3MS or engagement?
Well, I just want to make sure that everyone understands the 3MS initiative, and then I want to talk about it as a group.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'll do it. So the IB wanted to, 3MS stands for Making Measurement Make Sense, which is an initiative kicked off, I guess, about a year ago by the IB, and which has subsequently brought in the forays in the ANA, right? And they've retained Bain to basically do a whole lot of interviews with industry stakeholders. And being very candid now, I was skeptical about this whole initiative at first. And I can't lie to you about that because it said so in MediaPost. But they've done a great job, and I had to sort of humbly admit that I was wrong. And they've done a really nice job. I think that the driving impetus behind making measurement make sense behind the 3MS is making digital more hospitable to brand advertising. And so a big part of it was getting input from the brand advertisers about what it will take to get them to, you know, take those sacks full of cash they have over here and give it to the digital guys over here. A big part of it was, and there were a couple of things that came out. They came out with 5 core principles, 3MS. The first one, yeah, I'm sorry.
I would say, yeah, so let's go through it, then let's just focus on the phase 1 one about engagement.
I think the first thing they came out with was a viewable impression. That's really sort of the main thing. Oh, okay, that's what you're referring to. Okay, yeah. So the first principle that they came out with was that digital should move to a standard of a viewable impression, which is interesting because that reflects feedback from the advertisers that, quote unquote, when I buy digital, I don't know what I'm getting. When I buy TV, I have a pretty good idea what I'm getting. When I buy digital, it's a frightening wasteland of uncertainty, and I need certainty to spend all this money. And so that has manifested itself in an industry call for a viewable impression as the thing we count when we create advertising metrics.
In a backstory there is, recently Comscore put out some statistics, and other companies as well. AdSafe, we measure this as well. Anywhere from 30 to 40% of all ads we're seeing are not actually in view at all. And
I'd like to go on record that all offline media is an opportunity to see So when you measure print, you're showing the cover of a print magazine and saying, did you read this magazine? They're not asking if they saw the ad. They're asking if they, and so we're becoming much more accountable.
100% agree. It's not fair because we don't measure it in other mediums, and so it's just it's a reality of the situation, but it's a reality in offline media as well. You just can't do anything about it. Here, what we're saying now is we do know it's there. We can't put our head in the sand. We actually have to recognize it. Do we now create a new way of looking at media where it only counts if the ad's in view?
Well, so I got to respond to that because are we not yet again just sharpening the digital tool in a way that's not comparable in a cross-media view? I mean, there's no question that adding visibility into an understanding of ad performance is a sensible and ultimately necessary thing. I think it's just going to be table stakes at some point. But what does that say to the CMO? I mean, really what we should be focused on is not that little 10% pie that we have and how to make that piece of the pie smarter and better, although that's helpful. But how do we get the other 90% of the dollars to start to move over and be distributed properly according to consumer behavior and engagement? So, again, I think visibility is great and it's necessary and it's a sensible next step. But what we don't want to do is yet again go run 100 miles an hour into a digital direction that's only doable in digital and has no corollary and parallel to the way that other media is measured.
But you know what I would point out, Scott, is that if I bought an ad, if I bought a 30-second spot in Fringe, I know damn well that that spot is going to be on screen.
Sure.
And if it isn't, I'm going to get a make good. Now, what I don't know is what portion of the audience didn't watch the commercial or fast-forwarded through it, but one could make the argument that if the yardstick is getting it onto the screen, then there is a sort of a built-in
And I think it makes
in
publishers, in a lot of ways, much more accountable. What we're seeing is that people are being more accountable. There were, in Wall Street Journal a couple of years ago, they were talking about ghost pages and the malpractices of what publishers and networks were doing, not necessarily premium publishers, but some were doing it. So it holds people more accountable, and I think it's great. I also think that just understanding how people are engaged will give publishers a greater understanding of how to create a better content of their pages and being much more creative and not just having a lot of clutter at the top of the page, but more about understanding how people are scrolling and having a better experience for users in the long run.
I can just add one more thing. I think part of the problem is also that if we're selling a CMO on digital media being more accountable and measurable, then we better do a good job of measuring it. Because otherwise, you're saying, hey, take money from TV, print, whatever, spend it digitally because it's more accountable and measurable. Then we keep going back and saying, oh, but you can't measure well on TV anyway, so why should we be held to that, to a different standard? I think we should be held to a different standard because that's how we're selling it, right? And I think it's very fair that we have to come up with standards and metrics and so on that essentially prove the value proposition that we're offering digital media around. So, I think people keep referring back to TV not being accurate measurement because of DVRs and yeah, that may be true, but if someone's going to shift their dollars, you better have a better value proposition to offer.
I'd just like to add the channel has grown unbelievably well without any of these metrics at all, right? I mean, in what is eMarketer in 2016, it's going to be the majority of all ad spend will be digital. So I question the necessity for them to begin with. I question a lot more about them. But, the channel is going to continue to grow. This is where the audience is. And, there's no end of that in sight. So dollars are going to keep coming in at a very brisk pace, certainly over the next 10 years. And, rather than trying to, my feeling is rather than trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, we have to create native digital types of metrics and understanding and bring those to the brands and have them understand that this is what's happening in this channel. It is a completely different channel than traditional media. This is the only user-controlled medium. And because of that, there are native metrics and native types of measurement that need to be created and are being created, and different valuations that need to be placed on them. Impressions cost $0 in search. They're free, as many as you want. So I think that's a proxy for the way the medium is different, needs to be measured differently, and needs to be evaluated differently.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. So does it take a third-party outside group to create standards? Does that make sense? Or should we be continuing to do it ourselves? Josh, do you think it makes sense?
I guess my question is, who's we?
Yeah. Who's we?
You said third-party outside group, or should we do it ourselves? Who's the we there?
Well, I mean, we is the industry, and the third party is the fact that we have, like, say, Bain, who is, a consulting firm who arguably has less knowledge of the industry than we do, who come in to kind of be the police to help us figure it out.
So seriously, you couldn't find somebody more skeptical about the whole consultant thing than me, honestly.
My wife was at Bain for a number of years. So.
But they've done a really nice job. And
yeah, he was exactly.
That's right. They've done a really nice job here because. I've heard people joke about the consultant slides that Bain put up, but what do they do if they're doing a good job? They ask the right questions of the right people, and they summarize the answers. So, no, I don't think Bain's going to do anything, really. I think it is the industry. I assume the IAB is the industry itself. But I will also say that I'm generally wary of standards that are created too soon. I think standards need to emerge. I think it's better when standards emerge organically than when standards are imposed on a nascent medium, because sometimes, the standards codify things before it's time to do that. So I think you got to walk a line there. Standards help, but they can also hinder.
I think from a buying standpoint and planning standpoint, having standards has helped the industry. Before, we didn't know what an impression was or what a click was, and I think it's really helped. It's hindered the industry when we didn't know what it was, and we had to have the MRC accredit DART and Atlas to understand whether or not their methodologies were in fact accurate. So I do think that having some kind of standards is important.
Great. We're going to be out of time soon. I want to make sure we have time for questions. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free right now. We have one right over here. Okay.
So we all agree that TV metrics aren't necessarily measurable or entirely correct, but how correct are online metrics? Even within the industry, Bain aside, numbers between DART versus Omniture versus ComScore don't necessarily line up. How accurate are the metrics we have, and what's happening to make them more accountable?
Great question. Who wants that one?
Well, I think you have to start with what metrics are we trying to, what are the key metrics? What are the metrics that matter? What are the folks who are at the top of the pyramid who are directing that enormous budget of $1 billion or $800 million? What are the metrics that matter? Because the ones that you talked about, I don't think they matter to the SVP of advertising at Verizon or at Coke. Those matter to the online part of the house. I think, again, we have to turn this into a cross-platform story and look at it through that lens. So when you look at it from a lens of what are the metrics that are going to help drive reallocation, online actually has some pretty amazing capabilities. What Dynamic Logic did over the last 12 years to create a market around doing test control studies to measure the incremental change of that's a huge thing. That doesn't exist in television. You can't even do it in television because the way television is bought and the exposure patterns. That's a huge thing. Those are really powerful metrics. The work that we've done with companies like Catalina on the Nielsen side and dunnhumby on the ComScore side, this stuff is enormously powerful. We are generating the right metrics. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that generally digital does a great job of trying to answer the questions. I just don't think that we do it in a way that's scalable, nowhere near standards, if standards are even possible, and we have a hard time. And this isn't necessarily our fault, but we have a hard time breaking down the sort of conflicts of interest and the barriers that exist at the planning stages, the cross-media planning stages.
Yeah, one thing I would add to what Scott said, pretty much all of which I agree with, is that we all hear that digital is the most measurable medium, but sometimes we forget that the corollary to that is that digital ends up being the medium with the most measures.
Yeah. Next question.
Hi, the elephant in the room for me is that all of the metrics that we're talking about are hanging by one psychological thread, which is that back to that conversion funnel, which is that awareness will eventually yield to a sale, but we're seeing that brand loyalty is disintegrating. And hyperlocal marketing is going to be stepping in. So Coca-Cola can spend $1 million making me aware of their brand, but a coupon at point of purchase is going to take all of that and throw it in the garbage. Does anybody have anything to say about that?
I think it's just a fabulous question. It's the right question. I think that, again, this is a failure, but also an opportunity of the industry. I think that, back to the last session talking about big data, this is where big data can actually help us answer that question. And what we need to do, and I can't tell you how we need to do this. Most likely it's through a pretty intense collaboration where we actually, potentially competitors put their knives at the door and get to work together. But we have to create validated metrics that can be produced at scale. Metrics where we can walk into a CMO and say, for once, I'm gonna give you a metric that you can care about and you can actually confidently reallocate dollars on, not some soft brand tracking metric or some fraction of a conversion on a website. There's no easy answer here. But I think that I think we're at an inflection point where the data is now available through the big data integrations with the Catalinas and the dunnhumbies, through these great attribution models that folks in this room and their companies are all working on. I think that we're getting closer and closer to a point where we can produce a metric that will actually take digital far beyond what television can do, and provide real proof points, and again, metrics that matter, which is a 3MS term, but really metrics that matter. I know what the conversion is. If awareness is the thing that's going to drive market share for my company, I need to know that. I need to know what the conversion factor is between a point of change of awareness among a given audience and a projected sales number. That's what we're working on, and I think that it's something that the whole industry needs to work on.
I'd like to answer the question because really what we're looking at is a completely different set of metrics, and that's real time. And that's something that's not been talked about in this panel. None of the metrics any of these guys have spoken about have to do anything with real time. And that is timing, as we know, for all advertising is the most important element. Timing and context are the two most important elements to influence someone to do something. I mean, that's what advertising tries to do, right? So having real-time metrics, having them at scale is going to be completely game-changing, and in some ways makes a lot of this stuff seem very, very antiquated, seem very, very non-digital. And the amount of real-time data that's flowing now through social channels, through publisher channels, I mean, we sit on a ton of it every day around intent. I mean, you could think of Google also as a real-time, the first real-time advertising platform in many ways. That's going to change everything. And I think as advertisers and marketers start to understand it, and it is pretty understandable, especially when you add other pieces of data to it, geolocation and other types of things, and it's unbelievably actionable, and there's unbelievable ability to optimize against all those things, it changes this entire conversation. And it gets back to what you talked about, which is, are people actually doing something when they see this advertising? What are the outcomes, right? All the stuff here we're talking about really isn't, outcomes are what's important.
Okay, I think that's it for today. Thanks again for coming, and thank you, all the panelists, for